Welcome to Embodied Spirituality, the psychophysiology of contemplative practice. It is based on the work from Unstressed by Dr. Elaine Doherty, a book about improving emotional health, wellness, and resilience through the understanding and the transformation through the body. It is written by Dr. Elaine Doherty, a writer, speaker, professor, co-director of the Mind and Heart Lab, author of 3 books of emotional health and wellness, and a blog writer for Psychology Today. This is part 1, Understanding and Reducing Your Fear Response. And I'm Dr. Elaine Doherty, and welcome to our 6-part series. This is part 1. Part 1 lays the foundation for understanding what happens to us when we get off balance, when we get consumed with stress, anxiety, worry, depression, loneliness, and it really kind of lays the foundation of understanding what happens when our fear response system takes over and we get out of balance and we don't know how to function from a grounded space. So the very first thing, again, this is about improving your emotional health. So the very first thing that we should be talking about is, what is emotional health? The best way that I can describe it is that you know it when you feel it. You know when you're performing your best, when you're at your deepest self, and when you're just kind of in the zone and just grounded in who you were meant to be, seeing and perceiving the world from that space and behaving from that space. You also know when you're completely knocked off with worry and anxiety and perceiving the whole world from that space and beginning to, behave, make choices, react from that space. We know it when we feel it. It is an all-consuming physiological mind-body response. And so to be able to really understand how to reduce one and cultivate the other, we need to really kind of look inside and see what's going, because our beliefs about stress and anxiety are backwards. We always think of stress as something out there that's happening to us, and we're just responding. And the truth is that who we are on the inside and the way we're processing on the inside is how we perceive and how we make sense of what's going on the outside. And so the only way to balance our system and to be able to cultivate more often behaving from that grounded space is to look inside to find out what's going on, and then to use that as a blueprint to be able to use that as a transformation for change. The truth is that we have 2 systems that guide us. And you'll see shortly that you have your fear response system and you have your calm and connection system. Those are 2 drives that drive our emotional lives. And you can't be in both drives at once. And the drive that you're in most often is the drive that becomes the dominating force of your life. Because again, as you'll see shortly, the more often we're in any drive, the more we create the capacity to actually live from that drive. And I'm going to lay all this out, exactly how this all works for you, because the truth is that we don't see the world how it is. We see the world how we are. And basically, we have 2 ways of seeing the world. We have a way of seeing the world from that stressed out, anxious, worried space, or depressed or lonely, or any one of the other kind of emotional states that goes along with those. And as you'll also see shortly, those are all part of stress. But we also have the way of functioning from that space of our deepest self and our grounded self. So the big question is, how do we reduce the times that we're overcome with the emotional states that knock us off balance? And how do we more often soak in, rest in those states when we're our best self? And how do we actually create the capacity to more often live from that state? And so what I'd like you to do is I'd like to share a story with you, because this story for me kind of takes all of these pieces together and is a really good representation of what this whole program is about. And it was a morning, this was a morning many years ago, when I was a single parent And I had two very young boys, and those boys were very active, and I was working full time, and I also was trying to put myself through a PhD program. To say the least, it was a very chaotic time in our life, and we were doing everything we could. I mean, we were doing great if we could just get ourselves where we had to go in the morning, because to get my sons off to school and their homework done and them ready for their day and me to my work and ready to do my day was just an absolute challenge every morning. And if you have ever been a parent of young children, you know what that's like. Well, it happened to be a really, really, really chaotic morning one morning, and I'm trying to get the kids to school. And of course, what happens is when you get stressed out, you get knocked off balance, and then you see and perceive everything from that state. So what did I see and perceive? I started seeing and perceiving. My inner chatter goes off. I'm seeing and perceiving everything from that state. I'm just beating myself up. I'm a horrible parent. If I was a better parent, my kids would be perfectly on time and perfectly dressed and have their homework done, and we would all be calm and happy, and all the stories that start to go off. We have between 60 and 80,000 thoughts a day, and those thoughts were beginning to just consume me. Those 60 and 80,000 thoughts. They're about 80 to 90% repetitive and about 80 to 90% negative. And those were going full force with me. And so I'm trying. I finally get the kids off to school. And okay, I'm doing good. I know if I can just make it to school on time, I'll be fine. And then all of a sudden, I'm driving down the road and there's construction. Oh my gosh, this is just going to make me late. And now all of a sudden my inner chatter kicks in about what a horrible professor I am and how bad I would just, if I could just get it all together, I'd be a better professor and I'd be there on time and I'd be all organized. And so I'm just in my head getting more worried and more worried and more worried. And the truth is I was just beginning to learn all this stuff, but it hadn't really kicked in for me that morning. And so I'm driving, I'm thinking, okay, if I can just get there. And I used to have, it's not true at Cal Poly now, but I used to have a parking lot right next to the building that I taught in, and I could always find a parking place at Cal Poly. Now, if you're from Cal Poly, you know that is zero true now, but it used to be true. And so that was one thing I didn't have to worry about, and I could be parked and in the building within 5 minutes because I just parked right next to the building. So I pull in and I'm trying to get there and I run into more construction and it's raining, and I'm just, of course, now my inner chatter is going 100 miles an hour and telling me what a horrible person I am, and every single shame-based thought that I've always harbored about myself is coming up. And I pull in and there's no parking space. I couldn't believe it. So I gotta go drive back all the way around the building, all the way around to a whole nother parking lot on the other side. And it's now my inner chatter is just running rampant like crazy. And something happened, and I don't know what it is, but it finally kicked in. It was almost like something knocked me overhead. I heard a voice. It was like, Elaine, what are you doing? And again, I was just beginning to learn this stuff, so it did take a little while to kick in. But as soon as it kicked in, I was like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? Just pause. So I got out of my car and I just took a breath and I just paused. And it's like, okay, what's really going on right here, right now? Just pause. And then after I paused, I thought, okay, just become present. Because again, these are all the tools that I'm learning at the time. So just become present. What does it feel to be present right here, right now? It's actually kind of nice. It's the first time that I actually noticed the beauty of the morning. Yeah, it was raining, but it wasn't raining that bad. It was just sprinkling a little bit. And the truth is that the light sprinkles kind of felt nice on my cheeks, and it was beautiful. And I looked around and there was Mount Baldy off in the distance and there was snow on it. And the athletic fields were beautiful, and and it was just like, oh my gosh. And all of a sudden in that moment, everything shifted. What's true right now? What's true? I love my children. Sometimes we have some trouble in the morning, but I am so grateful to even have those children. And in that moment, everything shifted, but nothing changed. Everything externally was the same, but internally, everything shifted. And all it took was a pause and really becoming present. And I need to be really clear that I did that first because what was going to happen next became really important, but I had no idea something was going to happen next. And had it not happened in the order that it did, I would have never been available for what happened next. And so what happened is I'm walking in, I go across the athletic fields, and I run into my dad. Now, my dad and I taught for the same department, but I was always running in late to the other side, so I rarely saw him actually, even though we taught for the same department. And my father, my father was my hero in my life. And when I saw him, because I had shifted beforehand, it just seemed like he was the most important thing at that moment. It didn't matter that I was late, and honestly, I really wasn't that late. It was something that I was making up in my head. It was only an exercise class. It's not like the whole world is going to fall apart if I'm a few minutes late for an exercise class. And it just, my dad was just the most important thing to me at that moment. And I felt like a little girl just in love with my daddy, the hero. And he was teaching a golf class in the rain. And, he used to carry these huge umbrellas. And so I just dropped all my stuff and I held the umbrella for him. And, his class is standing in the rain. And yeah, I don't know how to explain it, but there's those moments when magic happens, and the magic of connection is so far beyond words you can't even explain it. But that was one of those moments with me and my father. And then it just started raining harder, and so he was laughing, his golf class was laughing, and he excused them because it was time for them to go. My class was inside, so I left him, and I went into the building, and I was walking down the hallway. I thought, wow, that's what that was all about. What a lesson. Because, yeah, I was maybe a few more minutes late, but when I walked into my class, I was fully available. I was emotionally grounded. I was fully available. I was really able to connect with my students. I was bringing in what I was in myself, I was bringing in a completely different person than if I would have kept in that stressed out state and ran into my class, maybe even a few minutes early, but stressed out, not available, blowing my stress all over my class. It was a complete transformation of who I was bringing into the class. And had the story ended there, it would have been enough, but it didn't. My dad started not feeling well, and when he excused his class, he went home for the day because he wasn't feeling well. And when he got home, he had a massive heart attack and died. And that was the last time that I ever saw him. It was the last time I ever spoke to him. And I thank God for that missing parking place and for being late that morning. But it's so important. I can't imagine how different the story would have been if my last words to my dad would have been, "I'm sorry, Dad, I'm stressed out. It's been a horrible morning with the kids. I don't have the time. I'll just talk to you later." I can't imagine how different that story would be. And it's so important to me when I bring back that it wasn't seeing him that transformed me. It was that moment of choice in myself. And that moment of choice in myself made me available to be with him in a way that I would have never been able to be if I hadn't have taken that moment of shift. So let's bring this all back to what our whole program is about. For me, that morning epitomizes kind of the power and the potential of both systems. I was overcome in the morning with stress and anxiety and worry and shame and beating myself up. And yet every moment offered me a shift. It took me a while, But once I was really able to shift, then there was just the power and the potential of a whole different way, a whole different emotional way of being. And so again, this is all couched in stress. I need to really be clear about what stress is. Stress is, or anxiety or worry or depression or loneliness, all of that is under the umbrella of stress. Because when we really look at what stress is, stress in itself is emotional disequilibrium. What does that mean? When the term stress was originally coined, it was coined from mechanics, and all it was meant was it was kind of the force against the free flowing of a machine. And so we know when we're free flowing, we know when our bodies and our minds and our hearts and our souls are in sync, and we know when we're working well together. And we also know when we're not. So stress is anything that counteracts that state of us being kind of flourishing in our full sense of being. And so again, stress is a real umbrella term that that includes all of that. So what might you be feeling right now? You might be feeling worry, you might be feeling anxiety, you might be feeling, the fear of the unknown, not knowing what all of this means. You might also just have kind of a non-specific anxiety and worry dominating your existence. But the thing is that there is hope. When we couch emotional difficulty in the terms of looking at what it is, emotional disequilibrium, and we ground it in kind of how our whole mind-body complex works together, we can see how it all happens. We can see how our brain and our perception kind of starts that whole kind of domino effect of us falling out of that state of equilibrium. And then we can see how to be able to reduce our fear response, basically when that stress system is running rampant. But we can also see then the power and the potential of intentionally cultivating the other. And so even though couching stress as anything that causes emotional disequilibrium, worry, loneliness, depression, worry and anxiety about the unknown, worry, all of the myriad of things that we might be feeling right now, we can understand why and how we experience emotional upheaval in the first place. But from that understanding, we can create a blueprint for change. And that's the most important piece here. So again, while we're kind of globalizing stress, that in a way might sound a little discouraging at first, it's really actually hopeful, because then it gives us a blueprint for change. It gives us kind of a way to be able to understand and therefore intentionally cultivate a different way of being. So what is this about the human system you live in? Let's talk about this a minute. I talk a lot about the term body. And when I talk about body, I don't just mean from your shoulders to your toes. What I mean is this whole system, the human system that you live in. And the truth is that this whole human system that you live in, as long as you're humanly alive, and I'm not talking about what happens after you're not alive in your human body anymore, but as long as you're humanly alive, your human body, this whole mind-body complex system that you live in, facilitates your experience for you. It thinks, it feels, it tells you how to behave. And again, I'm not saying it comes from there, but it facilitates your experience. Okay, so it facilitates your experience. So understanding in that human sense how it works is an all-important piece here. The next really important piece to understand is that you are a system of adaptation, meaning that anytime you experience any emotional state, any mental state, any psychological state, you just get better at that state. And I'm going to get a little bit deeper into how and why that happens in a little bit. So let's go back to our two drives. Again, you have two primary drives that control your existence. One is your fear response system. One is your calm and connection system. You may have heard about your fear response system. It's the fight or flight complex. We've always, a lot of us have heard that a lot when we talk about stress. But the second system often gets left out of the conversation. And really true management of emotional health needs to look at both, because we need to reduce one, yes, but we need to also actively cultivate the other. Because when you look at our bodies as a system of adaptation, we're just going to get better at what we do. And so all we do is reduce our fear response, we're just going to get better at reducing our fear response. But after reducing our fear response, if we intentionally cultivate love, compassion, hope, gratitude, then those begin to be the systems that actually control our lives. So it's a two-piece approach. And the thing is that we had to have both of these drives to survive as a species. We had to have our fear response. We had to have an immediate, totally reactive, all bodily consuming reaction to fear, to stress, to danger. And it had to be pre-thought. It had to consume our whole system, and we had to react. We still have the remnants of that system in our body. The problem is what causes our fear response now is every time we open an email, or every time we have a conversation, or it gets activated way, 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 way more than it did in the times of history when we were really relying on that drive to survive. But the truth is, we also had to have the other drive. We had to have a drive to love. We had to have a drive to bond. We had to have a drive to connect. We had to have a drive to create social connection. Because if we didn't have that drive, we also would have survived. We would have never survived as a species. We would have never loved each other. We would have never created community. So we had to have both drives. The thing is that you can't be in both drives at once. Physiologically, one or the other drive is prominent in your body. You can't be in both at once. You can switch from one to the other, but you can't really be grounded in both at once. The second piece is that the one that you're in most often is the one that flourishes. It's the one that creates the capacity for more of the same. And we're going to talk about our whole physiological imprint. We have a physiological imprint of every moment of every day. And the more you have any physiological imprint, you just get better at that imprint. It's like exercise. The more you do it, the better you get at it. Or learning to ride a bike, or learning a math problem. The more that your system gets used to doing that thing, the better that you get at it. It's the same thing with our emotional systems. So whatever emotional system, whatever drive we're in most often, we actually create a greater capacity to live from that drive. So it's not just what we're experiencing in the moment, but it's also what we're creating as a capacity to have the primary operating system of our life. The other piece is that emotion is a primary expression of each drive, right? So emotion basically is really what's the dominant drives of our lives. And it's not, the question isn't, is emotion good or bad? It's what emotions lead to kind of a healthy, grounded way of being, and what emotions lead to more of a chaotic place of being. Because as chaotic and unstable as unstable emotion can be, grounded, loving, and compassionate emotion may be your greatest asset. And it's the quality and the context of the emotion that determines which drive dominates. We used to have this conversation, is emotion good or emotion bad? That's not what the question should be. The question should be, which emotions lead to life and which emotions don't. And again, I don't use the words positive and negative because there's an inherent judgment then in emotions that we might term as negative, and I don't believe that. I think an out of balance emotion is an emotion that's just looking for healing. So I don't use the words positive and negative, but to remain in certain clusters of emotion too long can be really life degenerating. Also, to intentionally cultivate other emotional states, love, compassion, hope, connection, then that leads to states of life generation. The other piece here is that we see the world through how we feel. So at any given point in time, your whole mind-body complex is resting in and then reflecting an emotional state But from that emotional state, we see and perceive what the outside world means. So we see the world through how we feel at any given point in time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a really short video clip. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to really listen to the soundtrack. So it's only about a 30-minute video clip, but it's got a soundtrack to go along with it. And so the idea is I want you to really lend yourself to the feeling that the soundtrack is designed to give you. And then I want you to notice what you see. So really let yourself, because the idea is here, you know, how your perception shifts with a certain feeling state. And so I want you to really let that music, just lend yourself to the soundtrack. And then again, just really kind of acutely notice the things that you're seeing. So what did you notice? What did you feel? I don't know how many times I've seen that recording, but every time through, the first time I feel more anxious, the first time I see just more strife, I see more struggle, and the second time through, it always seems slower, it seems more relaxed. I'm always picking up a smile I didn't pick up before. I'm seeing beauty in ways that I didn't the first time through. And again, I've seen that a million times. So the big thing here is that we absolutely see the world through how we feel. So it's really important to kind of think about the feeling states that we're bringing to every moment of every day. But then the second piece here that's really, really important, as you'll see in just a few minutes, not only do we see the world through how we feel, but then how we feel begins to dictate how we see this world. And so it's this endless feedback loop or endless spiral, what I call the spiral of becoming, that creates our reality every day. And then again, the more it creates our reality every day, the more we just create the capacities to live from those states. So we're going to get deeper into talking about these two systems and kind of how they play out in our body. But first, what I want you to do is we're going to do a kind of a brief writing activity. So you're going to need to get out something to write with. I don't care if it's keyboard or paper and pencil. And we're going to go through the following writing activity. The first thing that I want you to do is you're just going to focus for maybe 4 minutes or so. And after I give the instructions, I'd like you to pause the recording. And what I want you to do is I want you to write about a time in your life. It could be a time period. It could be a specific event when you felt just particularly stressed. And again, remember, we're defining stress as just anything that really throws you off emotional balance. But I want you to write about a time where you really felt it embodied. And it doesn't have to be the most stressfully impactful moment of your life. You can write about that if you want. You don't need to. I want you to exercise some self-care in what you write about. But at the same time, I just really want you to write about an event where you really felt off balance, really felt stressed out, anxious, worried. I want you to write in detail kind of about the event or time period. And then I want you to zero in on a couple different things. I want you to zero in on how you felt generally, psychologically, you know, whether you felt overwhelmed or you felt stressed out, and then I want you to really focus in on how you carried it physically. So, did you have a stomach ache? Did you have a racing heart? Could you sleep? Could you, all of that thing. I want you to really kind of then focus in on the bodily sensation. And again, I want you to give yourself about 4 minutes to write and address each of these things. And again, it's important to kind of go into detail as much as you can in those 4 minutes. Pause the recording and write. So I just want you to notice how you feel, notice kind of the impact of your attention and how your body physically feels right now. And now I'm going to ask you to do something that's going to be really hard, but I'd like you to give the same time and attention to what you just wrote. And so if you're writing on a piece of paper, it would be a good idea to just have a totally new piece of paper. If you're writing on a document, just do it on a new page or something, because we want to start completely clean. And what I'd like you to do now is go through the same process. You're going to write about a time, but instead of a stressful time, I want you to write about a time when you were just grounded in yourself. You were just happy, you were joyful, you were in the zone, whatever words you want to use to describe it, but you know what it is when you feel it. So one of those times that you were just really free-flowing from your deepest grounded self. And again, it could be a specific event, it could be a time period, but what I want you to do is go through the 3 same steps. So write about the event or time period in detail, and as much as you can in 4 minutes. And then I would like you to kind of zero in on generally psychologically how it felt. Describe how it felt or how you felt during that time period. And then I want you to, again, if you can, zero in on how your body felt physically, whether it felt lighter, whether your shoulders felt lighter, whether it just felt expansive, however it felt. I want you to describe again physically how it felt in your body. And again, I want you to give this as much time and energy as you did the first one. And so you can pause the recording, and again for 4 minutes. So this is a super layered activity, and let me just go really briefly over what typically happens. Usually when I ask people to write about a stressful event, they immediately grab whatever they're writing with, whether it's a pen or a pencil or pressing on a keyboard. But what happens is all of a sudden they start focusing in, first immediately focusing in on a stressful event, and I can see their body language change. I can see their shoulders going up. I can see their knuckles being whiter. I always wish I had a pressure gauge underneath the paper to see how hard they're writing or how hard they're hitting the keyboard. But the collective energy in the room just begins to plummet and go down. And I watch, and people start banging their pencils and just really getting into it. I can see that they're just re-experiencing the feelings all over again. And then when I ask people to write about the happy event, often what happens is people just start looking around, and they'll just doodle a couple words and look around and pause a little bit, and then maybe they'll start getting into it, and so they pick up, and it's almost like they're reluctantly starting to lend themselves to the activities. But then what happens is all of a sudden, people start sitting up higher, their shoulders start going back, sternum starts going up. I see some smiles around the room, and some people will blush a little bit, and their whole demeanor begins to change, and then the whole atmosphere in the room begins to change. And so there's a lot of pieces here that are going to come back into play as we go throughout this whole process. First of all, and this is just kind of a blanket question, is how easily did you lend yourself to each activity? That's just kind of one of this, like it's an onion with all these different layers. But the next really a couple important pieces as far as we're going into content here is, how did you feel during those events? And then as you were going through those events and you weren't feeling good, how were you perceiving everything else? So again, and this is just kind of there's no right or wrong, zero right or wrong here. It's just really important to be able to kind of focus in, so you really get the experiential piece of what we're about to go into and talk about. And then a lot of people again will re-experience the feelings. When I do this in in a workshop or in a class, I usually have people tell their stories, and often somebody will say, God, I just feel like I'm feeling it all over again, with both stories, with the hard story and with the good story. And by the way, I always end this with the good story so we can kind of end on a high note. I had a young woman once say, God, if I wouldn't have written this and experienced this, I would have never even realized it. Because I came in this morning, I was in a bad mood, I had a headache, and when she got really into writing her second story, and all of a sudden everything lifted. So the other really important piece here is just the power of your attention. So, during the difficult story was really when your fear response system was in control and you felt from that, you saw the world from that. And then the really good story was when your common connection system was in control. And again, there's no right and wrong here because we don't automatically pick those systems. But there are things that we can do to be able to intentionally cultivate our capacity to kind of live more and more from one system instead of the other. And that's kind of where we're going with all of this. So the last piece of all of this, and again, I will want you to pause the recording again, is just kind of write and reflect on your experience as you were going through this process. Did you re-experience the feelings? How, just kind of your whole experience of writing as you were going through this process, and what did you learn about the power of attention, and what did you learn about your willingness to go to one story over another story? And again, there's no right and wrong. It's meant to be stream of consciousness writing, and just kind of write about your experience. Again, pause the recording. Okay, so let's bring this into context of everything that we've talked about. Number one, we all have two primary drives that dominate our existence: our fear response system, our common connection system. We can't be in both at once. We're in one or the other, and we see, perceive, behave from that state. The second piece of this, again, is that we are a system of adaptation. So whichever state we're in most often is the state that we create the capacity to be in more of the same. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some psychophysiological foundations pretty briefly. We don't have time to go into it super deep, and again, I would really encourage you to read my book if you're interested more, because I am going to kind of go briefly over this because in the context of time, and at the same time it's really important to kind of get some kind of understanding of the foundations of this. What we're going to talk about is a couple of things. So we have these two drives. Well, how do we get programmed for those two drives? So we get programmed initially to see and perceive in certain ways, but then when we see and behave in certain ways, and we keep perpetuating the way we see and behave and react, then we just keep perpetuating that programming. So how does that all happen? So this is what I call the spiral of becoming. Every moment of every day we are transforming. Every moment of every day we carry a physiological imprint of that moment. What we're thinking about, what we're feeling, our perceptions, all of that plays out in our whole mind-body complex. Now again, because we're a system of adaptation, the more anything plays out in our mind-body complex, the better we get at doing that. Again, it's just like exercise, or just like learning a math problem. Your body experiences something, and then it just gets more efficient at experiencing that thing. Our emotional systems are no different. So every moment of every day we're becoming something, and this is what I call the spiral of becoming. And what it does is it just kind of really simply lays out how kind of this happens in our whole mind-body complex. Now, again, we have a ton of spirals going on at any given point in time. This is kind of the way I try to simplify it. It all starts with our perception. We are perceiving way beyond our awareness every moment of every day, through our eyes, through our ears, through all of our senses. Most of it is subconscious, meaning that it's being processed by our brain, and beyond our knowledge. It may come to knowledge if parts of our brain decide that it's important enough to kind of bring to our attention. But we are perceiving all kinds of things that are going on in our environment at any given time. From that perception, again, this goes on in like a split second. From that perception, we make immediate meaning of what that means. And again, a lot of this is subconscious. It just is going on beyond our awareness. And then the minute we make any meaning of something, we have a physiological imprint that goes along with that meaning. our neural nets change, the electricity of our body changes, our biochemicals changes, but then the all-important arrow then is how we feel, again, goes back and affects how we're perceiving. And this, you just experienced all of this in the writing that you did and the little video clip that you saw. And then those BRCs that are spiraling off there are our behaviors, reactions, and choices that at any given moment in time, we are in any given point in the spiral, we will behave or react or make a choice that's consistent with kind of how that spiral is going for us. So how does it all start? The perception and the role of implicit memory. Why do we perceive the way we do? Well, we have this thing deep in our brain called our amygdala. And again, I'm really simplifying it because a lot of these systems play together. But I want to give you enough information for our purposes without overwhelming you with too much. So we have this thing in our brain called our amygdala. It's the size and shape of an almond, pretty small, but its job is enormous, and it records every experience we've ever had in our life, and it records it in emotional context, and it files it away to be used as programming to make meaning of all future events. It is subconscious. The amygdala itself is subconscious, although it works in concert with some more conscious parts of our brain, but the amygdala itself is subconscious. It's very connected. If you'll see that brown piece going down there is your brain stem, it is very connected to the rest of your body. So at some level, it's usually felt physiologically, but what it does is it records all of our past experience in emotional context, and then it evaluates our current situation and tells us how to feel in response to the way it's been programmed. So what then happens when your amygdala perceives something that looks something like it's experienced in the past? Front part of your brain is your frontal cortex, and that wants to make sense of it. And so what happens is your amygdala gets, kind of floods you with an emotional experience that's consistent with something that you've experienced before, and then the front part of your brain wants to make sense of it. So it attaches that feeling response to what's going on in your current environment. And this is going on all different levels, every moment of every day. It's how we make emotional meaning of our current context. If we didn't have that process in place, we wouldn't know how to make meaning of the things that we're seeing in our current environment. It's a really good process. And a lot of times it gets way out of balance because the amygdala does its job well, and sometimes it overdoes its job in the context of our current life. Again, the amygdala's job, built deep into our brain, is an important process. It teaches us to be pre-reactive, pre-thought when our brain senses danger. Imagine if I were a caveman and a tiger ate my friend yesterday and a lion comes walking up. I need to be programmed to associate big cat danger, and it had to be pre-thought, or I would have been dead. If I just sat there and thought, oh, wait a minute, this isn't orange and it doesn't have black stripes, I would have been dead by then. So the process is a good process. The problem is the way it colors our current perception. It's not always the threat that's programmed into our brain. It's like a fire alarm going off. And most of the time we react as if it's a full-fledged fire without even looking to see. So its job is to alarm us. Our job is to calm our systems down then and try to discern from the current moment to see what's going on. But most often we don't react like that. Most often our amygdala is coloring everything that we perceive in our existence, and we're operating from that coloring without even realizing that that's the case. It's also really important to remember that it's coloring everything that we perceive in very subtle ways that we may not even realize. So let me give you an example. I'm working with a man right now who is just excruciatingly worried about his mother's health. Now, given the fact that she's older and given the fact of everything that's going on in our society right now, that's a valid thing to be worried about. But he's so overwhelmed by the anxiety and the worry, and she's not exhibiting any symptoms, but he is so overwhelmed and so knocked off emotional balance that he can't do what he needs to do to be able to ground from a grounded state, be able to discern what's appropriate for her. So when we explored a little further about his struggles with this, what came up was that when he was younger, his stepfather had quite a drinking problem and was sometimes violent, and so the man that I was working with was always worried about his safety, always worried about his mother's safety, and always carrying this kind of non-specific anxiety about fearing the unexpected. So now, with not even realizing it, he's carrying those non-specific fears around his mother's health and safety into the situation right now, so much so that he can't operate from a grounded state in knowing really what's best for her. So your amygdala is constantly coding experience in the neurons of your brain and using that as programming to make emotional meaning of current circumstance. Sometimes that current meaning is way off balance, and sometimes that current meaning knocks us off our emotional equilibrium. So, and the way it records information, this is what a neuron in your brain looks like. It's a nerve cell. And the way that nerve cells connect together is the little pieces on the end there will connect to another neuron. One neuron itself doesn't really do anything, but the neurons connect to other neurons and they transfer information. And so all the experiences of our life get encoded in these neurons. Now, so the truth is that the experiences are over. And so a lot of people, unfortunately, we say, okay, the experience is over, so get over it. But the truth is that it's wired in our brain. And so if we don't wire something else in our brain in replace, then we're carrying it around all the time. And so every experience that we've ever had gets wired through these neural networks in our brain, and it's used as the programming to make sense of anything that we then experience in our current environment. So your wiring becomes your programming. It affects all that you perceive. It just does. It doesn't make it right or wrong. It doesn't make it good or bad. And my problem when I say this is then a lot of people start beating themselves up for their own programming, and that's not the point. The point is that when you just understand this, then it gives you a blueprint for change, because the beautiful thing that we have discovered in our neuroscience is that you have something called neuroplasticity. That means that the wiring isn't permanent. It means when you wire a new experience, it can actually break off and change the old experience. And so even those of you or those of us that have experienced trauma, either little trauma, big trauma, it's not in the event anymore. The event is over. And again, I don't mean to sound crass about it, because where it is wired in your neural nets. And the only way to really seriously get over it is to wire something else. Okay, suppressing doesn't work because it's still there. Taking off with it doesn't work because then you're just rewiring that experience. Blaming, shaming, or judging yourself doesn't work because then you're wiring in blame, shame, and judgment on top of the trauma. The only way to get over whatever has been traumatic to you in your past is to wire a different experience. So let's go back to the spiral of becoming. So that's how your perceptions get wired in your brain. So again, it's this wiring. The events of our lives are over, but we carry around this wiring that is used as our programming to make sense of everything that's going on in our environment, everything even way beyond conscious awareness. So then that first arrow going down from perception goes into making meaning. And again, most of this is subconscious. I wrote down their thoughts and emotions, but you can have thoughts and emotions that are subconscious. You just don't know they're going on. And so what happens is, and a lot of times you know this because you feel it. Again, you feel a response, and that's when your body, your whole mind-body complex is making sense of it, whether you're consciously aware that it's making sense of it or not. And then the meaning immediately lends itself to a physiological response. So now the second piece, remember I said how we get programmed initially is how our amygdala kind of programs us to perceive. But then what happens is the minute we make meaning of anything, then we respond. And when we respond, we respond we respond with usually some kind of meaning. We respond with a behavior, or a reaction or a choice, but we also have a physiological response. So when we behave the same way we always have behaved, and we react the same way we always have reacted, what we do is then we just perpetuate that wiring, right? You hear a lot the saying, nerve cells that fire together wire together. But the other truth is that when they stop firing together, they stop wiring together. So anytime that we can stop our typical reaction, we can stop our typical behavior. And again, it's not suppressing it. It's not pretending it doesn't exist. It's authentically changing your experience, which is a whole different ballgame. And we're going to talk about how you do that. Then we begin to honestly change our experience. Okay, and so this is the only way to kind of break the spiral of becoming, is to jump in somewhere at that spiral and give yourself a different experience. Because as systems of adaptation, we always respond to our experience. We always get programmed by our experience. And so the only way to change our programming is to authentically change our experience. So when our physiology jumps in, we have neural patterns that react. If we react the way we've always reacted, our neural patterns are just wiring the way they've always wired. We have electrical patterns of our heart, and those electrical patterns of our heart actually reflect our emotional state. And at some level, every cell and organ feels it. What should you never touch when there's a live electrical wire, except the wire itself, right? Any kind of fluid around that wire. Your body is fluid. Your body is largely made up of fluid. And so at some level, that electrical impulse of your heart is being felt at every level, every cell and every organ. And that electrical patterning, it's not necessarily the speed of your heart, but that electrical patterning reflects your emotional state. So it's like the Morse code of the body. And again, you don't know what's going on. It's all subconscious, but it's like the Morse code of your body. So your electrical impulses are sending out an SOS, and you don't even realize it. You just don't feel good when you're consumed with your fear response system. The biochemicals in your body, again, reflect your emotional state. Biochemicals are exactly what they sound like. It's like you have a little IV of different biochemicals, and every time you experience anything emotionally, you're squishing that IV bag that's appropriate for that biochemical. Your biochemicals have receptor sites for every cell and organ in your body and your brain. So when you feel something and you have the biochemical reaction that goes along with a certain emotional state, it really is affecting every cell and every organ in your body. So that's that physiological imprint of every moment. And so again, if we react, behave, and make choices in the way that we always have been, if we keep seeing our external circumstances the way we always have, we keep perpetuating that physiological imprint, which then again goes back and changes our perception. You are transforming every moment of every day. The problem is a lot of times, most of the time, we're just transforming to more of the same because we're reacting and behaving and making choices. We're never changing our authentic experience. And then what do? We complain, why doesn't anything ever change for me? But yet we don't ever do the work to change what's going on inside of us. So then what happens is once we have that spiral, again, it's going on every moment of every day, it carries a whole embodied reaction. And when it carries a whole embodied reaction, again, we go back and perceive our environment and react to our environment as if that's the truth. So I know I've given you a lot of information here, but the take-home message is that each of us are uniquely programmed to sense threat. Our deep brain is constantly scanning our environment for anything that it has been programmed to perceive as threatening to us. The way it gets our attention is to completely knock us off emotional balance and have us have a whole embodied experience of stress. This is what we call the stress response. So what happens when we have the stress response? We all have our own particular triggers. So it's really important to do a couple things here. It's important to understand what stress is for you in your own life. And again, a global term looking at stress is anything that throws you off emotional equilibrium. And again, stress isn't right or wrong. It's just important to understand. So, it's really helpful to kind of look at what is stress for you? How does it manifest? How does it feel? How do you usually react? What are your personal triggers? We all get triggered by emotional issues that we're wired to do that. Again, the best way to work with them is to figure out when you are triggered and then be able to reground yourself and come out a different way. But the very first thing is looking at the things that we do get triggered by. And then what happens is we get triggered, the inner chatter starts immediately. We all have these inner reels of chatter. Again, 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day, primarily negative, primarily repetitive, and they just go off with a vengeance. And so what does your inner chatter tell you? What is it saying to you all day long? Because most of the time it's talking to us all day long, and we're so used to it, we don't even realize it. And again, we are molding to every experience. So if we're just living in this stressed out state, we're living constantly triggered, we're living with that inner chatter reels going constantly in our brain and in our mind and in our body, we are just molding to more of the same. So again, the idea here is not to beat yourself up for your own stress response, but to use the foundation of understanding how and why it happens, how and why we perceive the way we do, and learn then to be able to authentically create a different experience. So what we're going to do now is we're first going to identify what stress is for us, how it's manifest, what are our triggers, what are our physiological responses, and then we're going to learn a step-by-step approach through this blueprint to be able to authentically create the capacity for a different way of being. So we're going to go into a writing activity. This activity is designed to be stream of consciousness writing style. In other words, you're just going to let the pen write you. I don't want you to think about structure or think about sentence control or anything like that. All I want you to do is just really let the writing lead you and just process what this whole thing called stress is for you. And then also maybe you want to add in what are some unique triggers? How do the triggers play out in your life? How do they color your perceptions? What does your inner chatter do? What is your inner chatter saying to you all day long? And then also, what are your physiological responses when you feel stressed out, when you feel overcome or knocked off of emotional equilibrium? What does that feel like? What does it feel like generally? What does it feel like psychologically? But what does it also feel like physically? So again, just pause the recording and write. Okay, so now that you've had the opportunity to reflect a little bit on what your experience of stress or emotional disequilibrium looks like, now building on the foundations of everything that we've gone through, hopefully understanding how your whole mind-body complex works together to first create a stress response in your body. And again, we're going to use that again as a blueprint on then what to do about it. So going back to the idea that you have two drives, we've got two things we need to do to be able to create emotional health or create emotional equilibrium. One is we need to reduce chaos of your fear response system. There's no way you can actively cultivate your calm and connection system if your fear response system is dominant, right? Because again, you can only be in one drive at once. So the other piece then is once we do reduce the chaos of our fear response system, we actively cultivate our calm and connection system. Because again, a lot of stress management programs or emotional resilience programs only work on reducing your fear response, but that second piece is so important. If you really want to create a greater capacity to live from states of love, compassion, connection in your life, then we need to train those capacities. So it's a two-pronged approach to emotional resilience. And underlying it all is your experience, because you mold to your experience. As a system of adaptation, you mold to your experience. Right? So what we need to do is we need to create another experience. It's not about just learning it in your head. It's not about the cognitive knowledge. It's about creating that experience. Now, all of the content that we've gone over already is really important to kind of understand then how to work this stuff. But the most important part then is beginning to change up your experience. So we have a two-pronged approach. We're going to reduce our fear response system. We're going to actively cultivate our common connection system. For me, I call those the 4 R's to emotional resilience. We need to recognize, first of all, when we are triggered, when we are stressed out. We need to recognize when our fear response system is in control. Most of the time, we're so used to functioning from our fear response system, we don't even realize that it's the dominant presence in our life. Then we need to release that. We need to do some tools. We need to learn some practices to be able to release what is going on with our fear response system. Release its hold on us momentarily, but also release its kind of residual buildup. And then we actively cultivate our common connection system. And so what we do is we begin to replace our reactivity with states of authentic love, compassion, connection, joy, fill in the blank with whatever, heart-based emotion is important to you. And then once we do that often enough, then we actually restore our capacities to be able to live more often from that state. So again, recognize and release is the thing that kind of reduces the fear response, but replacing and restoring is the all-important second step of really cultivating the capacities to live from heart-based emotions. So the program is made up of what I call in-the-moment tools. And in the moment tools are times when you're actually in a moment of trigger. And how do you be able to, all day long, every day, or every moment is a choice. Again, back to the story with my dad. I did those in the moment tools. And that in the moment tool, those two that I used that morning were the power of pause. I just paused, become present, take a breath. And then present moment awareness was really bringing my awareness, okay, to what's really going on right here, right now. And then it opened up the spaces for me to be able to really connect, right? So those in the moment tools are very, very, very important. And we're going to talk about in the moment tools that you can do to just, again, be able to recognize, release, but then also to replace your pattern. So in the moment tools are really important. Again, anytime you experience anything, you're creating the capacity to be able to do that more often. And so if all we did were, guided meditations or yoga when I had time, and I'm not putting that down, that's all super important. But we would always be then missing those moments where we can regroup in that moment. And again, the more that you retrain yourself to regroup in that moment, the more capacities you have to regroup in any moment. And then the second very, very important piece are the sustained tools. So the sustained tools are guided meditations, and we're going to have guided meditations for each one of these sessions. And a guided meditation is to really give yourself space and time to go really deep and really create a different experience. Now, the more often you do these tools, the more impactful they will be. Each session you will have a guided meditation, but I would highly, highly, highly recommend that you listen to them as much as you can, not just the one time going through. Because again, we mold to experience, so that what we're doing with the sustained tools is we're creating space and time to really cultivate a different experiential way of being. And the more we do that, the more we create the capacity to live from those states. So I can't stress enough how important it is to be able to do the sustained tools as much as you can, as much as you feel called to do so. Okay, so the very first tool that we're going to learn is the learn to pause. I call it the power of pause. And again, any moment of any day is an invitation for shift. It's the gift of shift. That's what happened to me the morning with my dad, was just the gift to be able to pause in the moment. Because again, most of the time we just react. We react not even thinking, we react unknowingly, and then we just mold to those reactions. Anytime you can just stop a trigger in the moment, you're actually changing the neural nets. You're changing the neural nets that usually continually jump from one trigger to another to another, and you're rewiring just your capacity to stop. Okay, so learn to pause just in the moments of reactivity. Just learn to pause. This is the first step. We're not even asking you to do anything else yet. Just learn to pause in that moment. So this is a tool called the Power of Pause. And what the Power of Pause does is you recognize the trigger without engaging in it, evaluating it, or suppressing it. This is most often what is termed as mindfulness. Mindfulness is defined as a non-reactive, non-judgmental, full presence. And so in the Power of Pause, we're just bringing a kind of a non-reactive witnessing or observing presence to what's going on to us emotionally. We're not taking, because what do we usually do? Usually we either take off with the trigger, which again is just creating more of a capacity to take off with a trigger, or we suppress it and pretend it's not there. And that doesn't work because again, this all comes from some deeper consciousness, subconscious areas of our brain, and just pretending it's not there doesn't work. It's still there and it's still causing all the body-brain dynamics that we talked about earlier. Or we think, oh, we shouldn't be having this, right? So we blame, shame, or judge ourselves for having the reactions. And then again, we're just creating the capacity for more blame, shame, and judgment in our life. So to be able to recognize it, observe it, be with it, but not take off with it is a super, super important skill to be able to cultivate. So you disengage from its emotional and somatic. Again, your emotional is the thing that you're feeling. Somatic is the bodily hold, as if it were someone else's experience. You become the observer. You hear this a lot. Either become the observer or become the witness, and be with it from a non-reactive, non-judgmental stance. Take several intentional breaths. I can't impress enough on you what a breath does to your physiology. A breath just automatically calms your system down. You have what's called the autonomic nervous system. That means that it's automatic. You don't control it. But there are things that you can do that will impact it, and a breath is one of those things. And I can't overemphasize how important a breath can be to calming your whole physiology down. Another really important tool to learn is an intentional sigh. Your body sighs to calm itself down, but that's actually an intentional tool that you can do. So if you just take some intentional sighs, your whole body, what happens is you have something called your parasympathetic nervous system, which is the nervous system that just calms you down and gets you grounded. Taking a sigh kicks in that nervous system. So taking an intentional sigh really helps ground you in that moment. And then if you can just let your experience settle on your awareness settle on the experience of breathing. I suggest that you come somewhere in your torso, because usually what happens, again, when you wrote about it, the trigger goes off and then the inner chatter goes off, and there's something about being able to bring your awareness somewhere in your torso that helps turn off that chatter. So, all else fails, you just kind of drop down to your belly and breathe, and wherever that is for you. Some people it's the heart, some people it's the solar plexus, which is below the heart, some people it's lower in your belly. I just tell people go to where it feels comfortable for you, and that might shift. It might be one place one day and another, but the idea is just to come down here, bring your awareness, and just settle on a breathing pattern. And then when you can begin to feel your reactivity subside, then you can reassess the situation from that grounded stance. It just takes a moment to do this power of pause, but what it does to your whole mind-body dynamic, again, kind of that third physiological circle in the spiral of becoming, goes back and completely changes how you're perceiving that moment and how you're able to be grounded in that moment. And then from the power of pause, you can either re-engage or you can do another tool. Like, with my dad that morning, I then went to another tool of present moment awareness. But sometimes the power power of pause is just enough. So that's the power of pause. Okay, so let's talk about present moment awareness. Present moment awareness, again, a lot of times you may do these together, but I do present them separately because they can be their own tool. And a lot of times people may gravitate towards one and not the other. Present moment awareness is when you just notice when you're triggered, you notice where your attention is, you notice, physically, mentally, emotionally, where all your attention is, and then you disengage from its hold, just like the power of pause. It's kind of like you're recognizing from a non-reactive, non-judgmental place. Then the present moment awareness asks you to kind of really engage in what's going on right here, right now. And there are a couple physiological things that really make that happen or make that more make you more able to do that. One is just relaxing the tiny little muscles around your eyes. And I always tell my classes, if you don't remember anything else that I say, just remember that tool, because your facial muscles are completely connected to your emotional system, and it's a two-way street. A lot of times they're reflecting our emotions, but they also control our emotions. And so if you can just relax all the tiny little muscles all around your eyes, it sends an immediate and automatic message to your brain to just calm down. So if you can relax the muscles around your eyes, and then your shoulders are the same thing, and you just kind of drop to your breath and then breathe. And after you're breathing comfortably and naturally, again, then you just pause and really experience all your senses, what it feels like to be right here, right now. Sometimes you can focus on the sights. That morning with my dad, it was like, oh my gosh, Mount Baldy's beautiful right now. And I could feel the rain on my cheeks, and I could look out and I could see the green athletic fields. And I was just really bringing myself fully present. And one of the things that helps to bring yourself fully present is to be able to just really kind of rest in your senses and then maintain that state of awareness as long as it's comfortable or appropriate. You might want to just keep in that space, right? Present moment awareness is actually a space that you can really live from the more you cultivate it. But it's a really powerful tool to be able to just stop and then engage. And so what I want you to do now is we're going to stop. I want you to pause the recording. And what I want you to do is just brainstorm and list situations in your life that you know are typical triggers. And what I'd like you to do is then list those events of where it might be really helpful to do either the power of pause and present moment awareness. You don't need to distinguish which one then, where all I want you to do is just kind of brainstorm and list, because it really helps to think about it ahead of time. A lot of times it's like we walk away and, oh my gosh, what, I could have paused there. And you may completely change a situation by just being able to pause, but there's really a lot of power in being able to anticipate those moments. So I just want you to pause the recording and think about all these different situations in your life that you might benefit from being able to use either the power of pause or present moment awareness. So in a few minutes, we're going to settle into our culminating experience, which is our first sustained practice. But before we do that, I'm going to give you some homework, and I want to explain what the homework is first so we can just really settle into the practice. So your homework, and again, you're going to have homework between every session, and the more you engage in the homework, I can promise you the more transformative this whole material is going to be. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to practice the power of pause at least 4 times a day. And I want you to jot down what your experiences are. Again, this whole program is probably going to be way more effective if you just kind of keep an ongoing journal. But as part of those, it's really important to just jot down or record. It can be just a little log where you just date and you put the tool in the situation. And just kind of record every time you do a practice. So try to remember to do the power of pause at least 4 times a day, and just briefly record your experience. You don't have to write a lot about it unless it is something that you want to write more about. And then I'd also like you to practice present moment awareness 4 times a day. I'm not sure what that 0 record your experiences is. There's a mistake there, but I want you to also practice that. And again, sometimes the one can lead into the other, but I want you to just kind of get a little bit of the difference there. Remember, the power of pause is just stopping and pausing. Present moment awareness is really just kind of coming into your body, but then coming out into the rest of the world and really soaking up, being very present with your external circumstances. The next thing that I want you to do is something called paying attention to attention. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute, because we're going to do it first as kind of a written activity. But what I want you to do is also record your experiences. So it can be an in-the-moment activity, and I'll explain what that means in a minute. And then I want you to practice the somatic clearing practice, which is the sustained practice that we're going to get into at the very end of this session, which will be in just a few minutes. We also have some optional activities. And again, the book is just chock full of a ton of different activities and practices. And unfortunately, we can't fit them all in, but there are a couple optional practices. One is called writing for release. It's kind of like the stream of consciousness writing that we've been doing, but your sole purpose is just to release the emotion out of your body. So you write about something and you start a timer. You actually time yourself for like 10, 12 minutes and just write and write and write and write and just release all that emotion out of after your body. Sometimes people will recommend that you burn it, or you rip it up, or you do something just to get rid of it, because the idea is, again, part of releasing is just to try to release that emotionality out of our body. And so the other optional practice is called somatic dialoguing. And the idea behind somatic dialoguing is we hold emotion all the time. And again, because your subconscious brain is more acutely connected to your body than it is even to your conscious brain, a lot of times your body harbors and picks up emotion in its physicality. And you can actually kind of calm and get into a deeper state, kind of a more of a meditative state, but still do it in a writing process and get in touch with those physical feelings. And it actually kind of accesses the neural networks in your brain to tell you kind of what you might be harboring emotionally that you're not even aware that you're harboring, and is kind of connected with that physical sensation. So again, those are really two powerful tools. I encourage you to do those as optional activities if you so choose. And so the next thing we're going to go on to is paying attention to attention. Okay, paying attention to attention asks you to just pause and notice where your attention is. Because most of the time it's on all kinds of things that we don't even realize it's on. It's on some inner chatter that it's taken us to another time and another place, or it's on worries about what's going to happen, or anxieties about what has happened. And it's very rarely exactly where we are. And most of the time, because we're so used to operating this way, we don't even know it. And so what I want you to do, again, this is an in-the-moment tool to just kind of pause and notice. But what I want you to do is I want you to jot down, just because it kind of helps the process here. So what I'd like you to do here as part of your homework is make a plan to pause several times in the next day or two and just notice. Just notice where your attention is. Don't judge it, but just notice. And then after you've taken notice for a few days, write in stream of consciousness writing style, again, in that journal that you're keeping that goes along with these sessions, and just kind of address some of the questions. And again, they're not meant to be addressed verbatim. I just want you to really kind of think about where your attention is. So where is it typically focused through the day? What are your thoughts and feelings typically focused on? What stories are you telling yourself about your current circumstances? Because we're always telling ourselves stories. And are you typically fully present with what's going on? And if not, how can you become so? So paying attention to attention, again, is in the moment tool. But the first time that we're going to do this, I want you to really kind of get into it, notice, but then kind of process and write about it. Because where your attention is, again, creates your internal experience, even if you're not aware. And your internal experience is what creates the capacity for more of the same. So just paying attention to where your attention is the very first step then in being able to change your attention up when it's in ways that's not helping serve you. So again, now you've got your homework for the week. You may want to come back to these last several slides and remind yourself what the practices are like, what the paying attention to attention assignment is all about, and what the specific homework is about. And again, I encourage you as much as you can to journal about this process and engage in the activities as much as you can. So the last thing we're going to do here is we're going to do a practice called somatic clearing. Somatic, again, just means the body, holding it in the body. And somatic clearing is really a body-based meditation practice. It's a guided meditation. And it will lead you into deep states of relaxation, but it's also designed to help you just release all the harbored up emotions that you're holding in your body. And so you're going to need to have a place with the introduction and the practice. It's like between 25 and 30 minutes. You want to have a place that you can be very comfortably for that amount of time. Most people for this practice like to lie down. You can do either, and for most of the practices, you can do either. This one, because it is so body-based and we're going to do some progressive muscle relaxation, I think it's a little bit easier if you have a space to lay down. And you want to really have an uninterrupted time and space that you can do the practice. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lead you into the practice. Once you get, it'll be a good idea to pause the recording once I stop talking and kind of get yourself all situated. There'll be a short couple-minute introduction to the practice, and then we'll go through the practice. But after the practice, I want to just leave you be with your own thoughts. It's a really good time to journal, so if you can have a journal close after the practice, it would be really nice. But I want you to just kind of settle into your own space. And most of the time after a practice, people are really kind of grounded in a private space, and so I'm not going to come back onto the recording after the practice. So again, what I want to do is just kind of encourage you at this point to make sure you're doing your homework, make sure you're journaling as much as you can, and then really kind of let yourself really lend yourself into the practice. And then the next session is all about how to intentionally cultivate heart-based emotion. And I'll see you then. Somatic clearing. Introduction. The first practice is called somatic clearing. It is built on the specific type of mindful awareness presented in Unstressed, specifically the steps of recognize and release, and is designed to help you release harmful emotional buildup from both your mind and body, reversing your mind-body feedback loop of emotional reactivity and opening up space for the subsequent practices to be more beneficial. In this practice, you will be guided through a process to first recognize reactivity in your mind and body, and then, through progressive muscle relaxation, release harmful emotional or somatic buildup throughout your body. Finally, you will be guided through a deep relaxation process to further cement to your state of release through your whole mind-body complex. Each of the subsequent practices will include an initial component of somatic clearing to ready you for the rest of the practice. Thus, it is important through your initial experience with this practice to train yourself to create the cleared state of physiological readiness for which it is designed. In other words, in this practice, you are both actively releasing emotional buildup from your mind and body in the moment, and further training yourself to create that state as a foundation for all the other practices. The practice will take about 25 to 30 minutes, and it is important to have an uninterrupted time and place in which to engage. Many people prefer to lay down for this practice, although it can be done either seated or laying in a supine position, which means on your back. You can put a pillow under your knees for back comfort if it is appropriate for you to do so. Also, you may want to keep your journal by your side, as after the practice is an extremely rich time to write and reflect. Somatic clearing practice. As we begin, let your awareness find your breath. Let your awareness find your breath at a focal or still point in your torso that feels comfortable for you to immerse yourself in the experience of breathing. It is not a controlled breath. It's a very comfortable, very natural breathing pattern where you can feel at one with your breath. If it feels comfortable to do so, extend the out breath just a little longer than the in breath. If you'd like, you can repeat the word release silently to yourself on every out breath. And as you do so, physically feel the sensation of release throughout your mind and body. It feels like your whole body is releasing a deep sigh. If it feels comfortable to do so, add in a couple of intentional and audible sighs. Physically feel the sensation of release throughout your mind and body. As we go through the meditation, somewhere in the background, keep part of your awareness always on this breathing pattern. Now notice what your thoughts are. Don't engage in the thought, but just notice. Notice your thoughts from a third person, witnessing or observing point of view, almost as if you were observing somebody else's thoughts. From this disengaged point of view, you might not even notice the content of your thoughts as much as the activity of your mind. Again, just notice. Notice if there is anything particularly present in your thoughts for which it might be helpful to promise yourself you will go back and address another time. If these thoughts can leave you be for the time being, acknowledge them and promise yourself you will do so. And feel those thoughts beginning to gently drift away. Now notice what you're feeling. Again, from a third person, witnessing or disengaged point of view. Maybe even with a little curiosity. Don't engage in the feeling, just notice. Possibly as if you were observing someone else feeling that way. Maybe even with a little disengaged curiosity or surprise. Notice that what you are feeling may or may not have anything to do with what your thoughts are. Again, just notice. Notice the context and texture of what you are feeling. And notice if it comes from a different part of your body than where your thoughts are manifest. Don't think about it too much, just notice. Notice if there is anything particularly present in what you are feeling where it might be helpful for you to go back and address at another time, if they can leave you be for the time being. Acknowledge them and promise yourself you will do so. And feel them beginning to drift away. Now notice your bodily sensations. Do a quick body scan from your toes, very slowly up through your body. And notice particular places of sensation, anxiety, discomfort. Again, just noticing without judgment or engaging in the sensation. Notice the context and texture of those bodily sensations. Maybe noticing with a distant curiosity. Keeping a disengaged point of view, notice if there is an emotional component associated with the bodily sensations. Notice the context and texture of those sensations and notice if they carry for you some intuitive message. Just listen and be open with a receptive and non-judgmental full presence without thinking about it or analyzing. Now we will refocus your physiology to allow you to be able to go deeper with the meditation. Continuing to keep your background awareness always on your breath. Bring your foreground awareness and intention to your eyes. Release the stress and tension throughout all the tiny little muscles around your eyes. The muscles surrounding your eyes, the muscles all through your eye sockets and behind your eyes. Now release all the tiny little muscles throughout the rest of your face, around your cheeks, your jaws, your eyebrows. It may feel like you are losing all expression on your face. Now release through your shoulders. Let your shoulders fall down and back as you are releasing the tightness surrounding them. If it feels comfortable to do so, very slightly and gently raise your sternum, which is the middle bone of your rib cage. Now bring all of your awareness back to your breath at a focal point in your torso that feels comfortable for you to fully immerse yourself back in the experience of breathing. Now we are going to do some progressive muscle relaxation. I will ask you to gently tighten certain body parts for a count of 3, and at the end of 3, release. Then, for the next 2 breaths, focus on an even greater sense of release through those same body parts. Starting at your toes and working on up through the balls of your feet, your ankles, your shin, and your calf. So from your toes to your knees, tighten for a count of 3, 2, 1. Now slowly let go and release. And for the next 2 breaths, just focus on the physical sensation of release even more through those same body parts. Focus on the physical sensation of release. Release. And now from your knees to your hips, tighten the front of the thigh, the back of the thigh, and into the muscles of the hips for a count of 3, 2, 1. Now physically feel the sensation of release. And then again, the next 2 breaths, physically feel the sensation of release. Even more through those same body parts, release. Now, from your hips to your shoulders, tighten your whole torso, front and back, your abdominals, your lower back, your chest, and your shoulders. Tighten for a count of 3, 2, 1, and physically feel the sensation of release. And again, the next 2 breaths, physically feel the sensation of release. Even more through those same body parts, release. Now simultaneously down each arm, from your shoulders all the way to your hands, tighten for a count of 3, 2, 1. Now physically feel the sensation of release. And again, the next 2 breaths, physically feel the sensation of release. Even more through those same body parts, release. You may feel like your body is beginning to melt into the surface beneath you, or perhaps even lift up off the surface a bit. Now imagine a wave of relaxation starting at your toes and coming through and around your body. I will name body parts, and as this wave of relaxation concentrates on and makes its way through each body part, deeply feel the sensation of release and relaxation of those same body parts. So this wave of relaxation is starting at your toes and making its way up through the balls of your feet and deep into the tissue of the arches of your feet, and very slowly up through your ankles. Now this wave of relaxation is slowly making its way up your lower leg, and you can feel the deep sense of release of the muscle tissues of the calf and back and your shin and front. And now very slowly, this wave of relaxation is making its way through your knee joint, and you can feel the sensation of release through all the tendons and ligaments that hold that joint together. And now this wave of relaxation is making its way slowly up your thigh. As it does so, you can feel it deeply penetrating the muscle tissue in the front of the thigh, the muscle tissue in the back of the thigh, feeling a deep sense of release all through the thigh. And now this wave of relaxation is making its way on up through your hip joint. As it does so, it is deeply releasing all the muscles, tendons, and ligaments that hold the joint together, and you can feel a deep sense of release through the whole joint. Now this wave of relaxation is slowly making its way up your lower torso. You can now feel a deep sense of relief through your whole pelvic girdle and your lower abdominal area, your lower back. Now it is slowly making its way on up to about the height of your waist. As it reaches your waist, bring all your awareness to your back. Now this wave of relaxation is concentrated, traveling up your back muscles, starting at the muscles on either side of your spine, deeply penetrating and releasing the muscle tissue as it makes its way up your back. Now it is releasing all the muscle tissue surrounding your shoulder blade area, and then into the shoulder joint itself. And you can feel your shoulders letting go of any residual tension, falling further down and back as your body lets go and releases. And now this wave of relaxation is simultaneously making its way down each arm. First, deeply penetrating and releasing the muscle tissue of your upper arm, and down through your elbow, your forearm, and down into your wrists, your hands, your fingers, and you can feel a profound sense of release of all the stress you typically carry all through your hands. Now this wave of relaxation is at the base of your neck, and it is slowly traveling up the back of your neck, deeply releasing all the muscle tissue of the neck as it progresses. And now it is at the base of your skull, like a cap beginning to unfold and encircle your skull. Imagine this cap of relaxation slowly unfolding around the top and sides of your skull simultaneously. And as it does so, you can feel yourself letting go of any residual stress or tension that you carry all through your head. And now it is like a curtain coming down all across your forehead. This wave of relaxation is slowly making its way down your forehead, gently over your eyebrows, deep into your eye sockets, and releasing any residual tension in all the tiny little muscles surrounding your eyes. And releasing all through your face, your cheeks. Feels like you are losing all your expression. Now it is traveling around your chin, your jaw, and down into your neck and throat area. Now this wave of relaxation is approaching your chest area, and once again you can feel your rib cage opening and releasing any residual tightness or tension. You may feel a slight rise in your sternum, a feeling of expansiveness. And now all your awareness is back to being fully immersed in the experience of breathing at a focal point that is comfortable for you. There is nothing left but you and your breath. I'm going to be silent for a few moments, and now just fully immerse yourself in the experience of breathing. Now, ever so slightly, bring a subtle shift in awareness to yourself deep in the meditation. Don't come out of it. It is more like you are observing or witnessing yourself deep in this state. Continuing to bring an awareness of yourself deep in the meditative state, pause and reflect. Notice if any intuitive insights come up, which may or may not be formulated in words. It is important to spend some time in awareness of this liminal state or in-between state, as it integrates the parts of your brain to more easily access the meditative state in your conscious moments. So spend a few more moments in this state. Through a witnessing awareness of yourself deep in this meditative state, try to make a cellular memory of this experience. In other words, it's like you are trying to cement this experience in every cell of your body. Now, at your own pace, begin to bring a little more awareness to how you're feeling, and more awareness to the sensations of being in your body. Of your hands, your toes, ever so slightly and at your own pace. Make sure you re-ground yourself in your body by moving your arms and your legs. Make sure you are re-grounded in the room you are in. Take several breaths in. Open your eyes when you are comfortable. Pause and reflect for several moments. Notice any insights and reflect on your experience. And jot down any thoughts about your experience. Spend a few moments journaling if it is appropriate. It is a very, very rich time to journal, as many insights will continue to emerge as you bring your experience to more conscious awareness through the stream of consciousness writing process.